everyone. This video was a long time coming and I'm really glad to finally be getting to it. Today I'm going to talk about questions that I think are important to most would-be pisciners and especially those like myself who are in the midlife stage. First things first, when did you know whether you got into the Common Core or not? I got my admissions decision the Sunday of the second week after the piscine ended. The staff had told us to expect our news to come around 2 weeks after the end of the piscine, so this was pretty much 2 weeks to the day. As you can expect, no piscine is going to have a 100% intake rate into the core, but regardless of what their final outcome was, I'm very impressed by the growth mindset and the positive attitude. I mean, one thing that we've all been reminding ourselves is in your lifetime, you have 2 attempts at the piscine. So not getting in the first time around isn't the end of the world. In fact, this will buy you time so that you can spend the next year or maybe the next couple or few years experimenting around, doing some vibe coding maybe, and kicking the tires around your passion for coding, whether that sticks, and how you can improve a little bit on your own. And that's going to show up as progress when it comes to the second time that you take the piscine. In that sense, the biggest gift that the piscine gives us is feedback. Because by forcing ourselves to code intensively for 26 days, we'll be able to get a better understanding of ourselves, where our strengths are, what were the areas that we struggled with. I think this extra self-knowledge in a situation where you have less time pressure because you're no longer limited by the 26 days, that's what puts you in a good place in between your 2 lifetime allocated piscines to do more learning and exploration. And so now let's come to the really big question first. Do you think that the piscine is a good showcase for employability? I think what's top of mind for everybody who's upskilling now is whether their efforts are going to lead into better job opportunities. And so I believe that's the most important question that every pisciner is going to have, regardless of whether they are early career or mid-career. I've been a hiring manager in digital marketing before, making technical hires to increase the amount of data literacy on my marketing team. And so I can say from that viewpoint that definitely the piscine gives us an opportunity to show a lot of skills that are hand in hand with employability. All through the piscine, the refrain that I've been telling everybody is, hey, this is a great simulation of a real-world tech working environment. The tools that we use like Slack and Git and all that, these are the tools that you'll be working with day to day if you were working in tech. And to be successful in the piscine, you have to be reasonably fluent in these tools. You have to collaborate and incorporate the inputs of multiple colleagues. And you need to have that ability to communicate technical concepts to people with varying levels of technical fluency. All of these will be things you need in employment. But as with anything that you put in your resume, really, the crux is less about whether you put it in and more about how you actually frame it. I think that depends a lot about what your prior experience is and what kind of roles you are applying to. Career mileage these days is about how you can balance across hard and soft skills. And so the way that you're going to position this is probably quite different, whether you're a techie or non-techie. For example, if you've got considerable coding experience from a young age and you're already technically very adept and you have a whole bunch of achievements that show your technical aptitude, then I think the piscine is less about your technical ability and more about how you were able to collaborate and bring along the people who are less experienced coders than you. On the other hand, if you've been a non-coder all your life and this is your first step into the technical aspects of the digital industry, then this is really not about you becoming from a non-coder to a coder per se, but about how this additional coding knowledge enables you to work more closely with technical colleagues, to be able to take that next step into turning ideas into prototypes and using that fluency to bridge that gap between the tech and non-tech. Now for question number 2, how feasible is it to do the piscine with a full-time job? The ideal situation, which probably is a dream for many of us, is that there is no interruption to our employment and we can upskill seamlessly while working full-time. In reality, would you say that's very hard to pull off? Well, I think we should never say never. Nothing is categorically impossible. But this is going to be a really steep curve. You'll need to have a very tight timetable, a lot of discipline, and considerable sacrifices to other parts of your life. Before I started the Piscine, I attended a walk and coach event organized by one of my friends on the coaching circuit. We worked out this plan that sounded really utopian. In fact, I managed to put in theoretically time for the Piscine, quality time for my family, and also to build my professional website in the evenings. And that never happened. I thought I already chose the timing for the Piscine that had the lowest opportunity cost for me because I was making a number of tax residency decisions before I set up my one-person company. And those decisions couldn't be made without, in part, the outcome of the Piscine being known. So I was kind of in a limbo where I wasn't able to do any form of paid work during that 1 month. I mean, that should be the ideal break, right? But in the end, I found that the Piscine really consumed all of the time that I had. And so everything else fell by the wayside. You can see that from the sheer fact that it's taken me more than a month to do this wrap-up vlog after completing my daily Piscine vlogs in real time. The reason why I couldn't straddle building up my contacts, building my professional website, and the Piscine at the same time is because the Piscine in itself is a really steep learning curve on 3 fronts. If you didn't come from a software engineering background and you didn't do coding as a hobby, you have to learn C, master the mechanics of Git pushing and pulling stuff, and also get used to the cadence and the mechanics of the peer evaluation process, which is pretty bespoke to 42, all at the same time, and all this hits you during week 1 of the Piscine. I thought I was very prepared already on the tech front because I've done some Python scripting in the past, and I watched David Malan's Harvard lectures and did the problem sets for practice. But that's not quite enough exposure to C to make it second nature enough for you to really ease into the intense repetition and intense application that the Piscine involves. And I think really intensively preparing for one of these 3 aspects, either through a discovery Piscine or mastering some C fundamentals or getting a preview of Git, if I had done any of those 3 to a level that I was able to make that really muscle memory for me, I think that would have helped me be able to do the Piscine and balance it against other professional pursuits at the same time. And I think the other thing you need to be mindful of is if you're doing the Piscine alongside a day job, you're going to have to be very intentional about the limited amount of log time you'll be able to clock in. To stay focused and consistent, you have to plan ahead in terms of the amount of hours that you're spending on work and in the lab. Set goals ahead of time and plan ahead what do you want to cover on a weekly basis. I'll be doing exactly this when I start the Common Core because I aim to have a full professional life as a freelancer alongside my studies. All right, for those who got into the Common Core, I think this is the top question that they're thinking about now is, do they do this full-time or part-time? So what would you advise? This is one of the questions that I actually can answer with hard data. Before I did my Piscine daily vlog, I had a regular content strategy. My baseline engagement stats were about 20 to 30 engagements for most of my regular posts. And for really big milestone posts, I was getting into the 3-digit engagement range. So I think I would take signal from whether my engagement was going above or below baseline. At the beginning, I was getting my regular engagement level, and in fact, a little bit higher in the preamble and the first day or 2 of the Piscine because of the novelty factor and curiosity overall from my audience. By the time I hit week 2 and week 3 of the Piscine, and especially for vlogs that were talking about things like rush projects and exams, that's when my engagement really tanked, and I was getting single digits that eventually stabilized at about the low double digits for my posts on those topics. The biggest learning that I got from that is when you hit a certain stage of life and your career, the world expects you to be a professional rather than a full-time student. And I'm taking my cues from that to say my professional life cannot stop just because I'm going back to school. That reality is not going to make lifelong learning optional. In fact, I think lifelong learning and getting deep enough into it to really reinvent yourself, that has never been more important than now. What it does tell me is that we need to be very intentional about how we frame and position ourselves within that lifelong learning. In other words, when I was 18, it was probably okay to be a full-time undergraduate, but at 48, it's not really that okay anymore. I need to look at what I've done before and where I can continue to contribute, and then layer onto that the new skills that I'm acquiring and how that helps me to contribute at a higher level even before I'm done studying. And I think that's really agnostic to whether my gigs and projects are paid or unpaid. Even doing some volunteer work, which applies the skills that I have and am going to acquire, I think that still helps me build a unique portfolio that's unlike everybody else's. If you're an early career professional, that's not going to change. Everybody can build some real-world experience alongside studying. You do need to be strategic about it and play on your unique strengths and interests so that you don't become a carbon copy of everybody else in the same field. Because ultimately, I think what distinguishes each one of us is our motivations and our drive to solve the specific problems that we choose to solve. But I do think that any real-world experience that we can get, we should not stop trying to pursue that. 42 in any case is more practice-oriented than academic. So I do believe there is some level of cross-pollination between self-learning in 42 and to do self-directed projects, real-world projects that enhance our own personal portfolios. But be prepared that the biggest trade-off here is the impact on your personal time. If you have 40 hours per week of paid work plus 20 hours per week of the Common Core, that's a 60-hour week. I'll be very honest, when I was in the life stage of Gen Z today, I was very resistant to the idea of burning weekends, even though I still had to do it from time to time anyway. Now, though, I feel like this is a period when we have no choice because we are both managing functioning in the current economy and building an on-ramp for ourselves into the new one. That's very challenging. And so to me, the stake here is whether I continue to have a place as a knowledge professional in the new economy. Will you continue on from the Common Core into specialisations? Singapore is still a very degree-obsessed society. When I started this journey, I was like, of course, there's no way that I'm going to end with the core. I have to go into the levels that will get me the RNCP 6 or RNCP 7 certifications, which are recognized as degree equivalent because everything is about getting degrees. Subsequently, I reflected a bit and I realized that even if I hit those levels of technical proficiency within the 42 curriculum, I'm not going to take it for granted that the certificates are attainable, because to get the degree certificates, you don't just have to hit the levels. You also need to get internships. And internships are built for people in a very different stage of life. They are meant to be an on-ramp for students at the undergraduate age group to get some initial work experience. So internships are not something that I think are a good fit for someone entering their 50s, nor should I be taking away opportunities in programs that are aimed at giving early career entrants a first step into the working world. So I think the question about specializations really is about whether the technical content is helpful to me in terms of the projects that I'm doing at that point in time, whether they unblock things that I'm doing in the real world. And I'll take it from there to continue building my portfolio. And who knows, maybe by the time that comes around, the internship itself might be a mechanism that evolves. Maybe I can turn some of my real world projects into internships for myself. We never know. So I think it's good to just let it pan out and see what happens at that point in time. So finally, let's get to the money question. How optimistic do you feel that 42 will lead to real career opportunities, especially for midlifers like yourself? And especially since the demand for entry-level software engineers is pretty volatile. They're already spending less of their time on basic coding and more time on orchestrating and supervising AI agents. How confident are we that demand for new software engineers is going to continue to grow? Well, I've worked in e-commerce for over a decade. So although I wasn't doing software engineering, I was working pretty adjacent to the discipline. And so I have friends both in software engineering and in product management. And I've heard a lot of stories about how software engineers are doing less coding by hand and product managers are expected to get more involved in coding. So you can see that it's not just about AI will reshape our jobs. It is already reshaping the jobs of people in the tech industry. That's why I think that how we are going to position ourselves in the future, a lot of it is going to be about AI plus X, with the X being the, X factor that keeps us employable. So for people like me who aren't from a coding background, 42 is really about building the AI and coding, in fact, to complement that plus X. In other words, our secret sauce is not going to come from necessarily having the ability to code per se, but being able to use code to move whatever we already did and the problems that we choose to solve into the digital era. The good news is, regardless of where we land up in terms of our coding ability, I think being able to adapt into some of the very bespoke and honestly weird processes of 42 and being able to pick up coding sometimes at an advanced stage in life and with very little background, all of this speaks to our adaptability and the habit, the mindset of being able to adapt and pick up new skills on our own from scratch. That is going to carry us and enables us to change with all the change around us. So for those of you who are thinking of giving 42 a try, I hope that this vlog helps to answer some of your questions and give you some perspectives and to determine whether 42 might be a good fit for you. And for those of you who are joining the common core in 42 Singapore for 2026, regardless of whether you were part of my Piscine batch or the one after it, I look forward to seeing you this September at SUTD. This is a long random walk, a channel focusing on upskilling and the increasingly non-linear journey behind it. Thank you for watching and see you next time.